If you agree with standing up when no one else will, even when it isn't your fight, like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because this story began long before anyone in that mess hall realized what was about to unfold. And it started with something nobody paid attention to at first. The old wooden footlocker discovered during the renovation of a condemned storage unit on base. The kind of forgotten military relic no one expects to matter. It was wedged behind rusted cots and outdated training manuals, sealed with a lock older than the building itself. And when the workers popped it open for inventory, they didn't expect to find documents stamped with classifications nobody had clearance for anymore. Citations signed by commanders whose names carried the kind of weight that made even seasoned officers stand still, and a folded piece of paper labeled only with a date. May 17, 1972, written in a trembling hand. But what mattered most wasn't the papers, the metals, or the faint smell of old gun oil clinging to the wood. It was the story attached to that footlocker, a story none of them knew yet, a story that didn't belong to some decorated officer or legendary operator, but to a man most believed had lived and died without leaving anything behind. Maya Rios, 28 years old, civilian physiologist, overworked and undercredited. Heard about the discovery only in passing, a rumor drifting through the command hallway that morning. But she didn't think much of it as she crossed the tarmac toward the mess hall, pushing wind-tangled hair from her face while balancing a tray of bland, reheated chicken and rice she'd grabbed mostly out of habit. Her mind was on lab reports, hydration metrics, and the sleep deprivation study she'd been asked to refine for the incoming BUD/S class. Not on mysterious footlockers or decades-old secrets, and definitely not on the problem waiting for her on the far side of the room. The mess hall was its usual deafening self, metal utensils clanging on steel trays, boots echoing off concrete, shout laughs ricocheting from table to table, and the ever-present smell of coffee strong enough to strip pate. She scanned for an open seat and spotted one near the back, tucked between two groups of operators who barely registered her presence. She liked it that way, quiet, unnoticed, unbothered. But the moment she stepped toward the empty spot, Corporal Denton stepped into her path with that familiar swagger she despised, a swagger fueled by ego, caffeine, and the belief that being attached to a Navy unit meant he was one of them. He wasn't, but Denton didn't care. "Well, look who finally crawled out of the lab," he said, blocking her with an exaggerated grin. The kind of grin that dared people to call him out because he never believed anyone would. "Doc Rios, you shouldn't eat alone. People might think you don't like us." Maya shifted the tray in her hands, suppressing the instinct to sigh. "I'm not in the mood, Denton." "Ah, come on," he said, leaning in too close, voice dropping to a mock whisper. "I think you're in the mood for a little lunch date. I'll even treat you to the fine cuisine, microwaved mystery meat, and whatever this green stuff is." He jabbed a finger toward her plate. She sidestepped him, moving to pass, but he shifted again, blocking her for the second time. A few of the SEALs glanced up, their eyes flicking between them, but not long enough to intervene. Denton thrived in that gap, just enough attention to feed his ego, not enough to stop him. Maya set her jaw. "Move." Denton laughed, and, with the kind of casual cruelty he'd perfected, slapped the underside of her tray. Just a quick, thoughtless pop of the palm, not hard enough to injure, just hard enough to cause damage. The tray jolted. Her food flew. Chicken and rice splattered across the concrete floor in a wet, humiliating mess. The noise of it echoed louder than it should have. Denton burst into laughter, loud and sharp, the kind that made people look even if they didn't want to. "Relax, Doc," he chuckled. "If you needed help skipping lunch, all you had to do was ask." Maya froze. Not because she feared him, she didn't, but because the temperature in the room shifted in an instant, the kind of shift you feel in your spine before you understand it. The mess hall noise didn't fade gradually, it collapsed. Forks hung midair. Conversations died mid-sentence. Boots that had been scraping against the floor went still. And Denton, still laughing, didn't notice any of it. Maya did. She felt it like pressure, like the entire room inhaled at once and waited. Slowly, Denton's laughter thinned, then stopped as he realized the silence wasn't accidental. He followed Maya's gaze to the tables behind her. Every SEAL within 20 feet had gone motionless, their eyes locked on him. Not angry, not shouting, not dramatic, just still. The kind of stillness that only comes from men trained to react before thinking. Men who had watched enough ugliness in the world to recognize a line being crossed. The kind of stillness that said this stopped being funny the moment you touched her. Denton's smirk faltered. Maya didn't move. She didn't need to. Because this, the sudden hush, the stare of a dozen operators, the air charged with the promise of consequence. This was the moment the story began. The moment no one in that mess hall would forget. The moment tied in ways none of them knew yet to that forgotten footlocker. Those sealed documents. And the name scrawled trembling across a sheet of paper dated 1972. And the moment Denton hit her tray and laughed. That was the moment every seal in the room went silent. The silence in the mess hall wasn't the kind that crept in. It was the kind that dropped, sharp and heavy, like a cable snapping on a ship deck. Denton tried to laugh again, a weak, breathless thing. But it evaporated instantly when Senior Chief Garrison pushed back his chair and stood. Garrison wasn't the loud type. He didn't need volume to command attention. He was built like old armor, thick around the shoulders, edges worn from decades of use. And he moved with the slow certainty of a man who never wasted energy on threats he didn't intend to carry out. The room shifted its weight around him. Conversations freezing midair, boots anchoring to the floor as all eyes waited. Garrison stepped around his table, never rushing, measuring each step as if he had all the time in the world. Denton straightened instinctively, shoulders tightening, the smile evaporating into something rigid and unsure. "Corporal," Garrison said, voice low, even, the kind of tone that made men sit up straighter without realizing they had. "You want to explain why you just put hands on one of my people?" Maya almost corrected him. "I'm not one of your people." But something in Garrison's expression told her not to. Denton cleared his throat, standing stiff. "Chief, it was a joke. Just messing around, you know. She knows I didn't mean—" "No," Garrison cut in, not raising his voice but slicing across Denton's excuses with a precision that made the room feel smaller. "I don't know." Denton blinked. "Sir, don't call me sir," Garrison said, the correction automatic. "And don't insult everyone in this room by pretending that was a joke." A ripple moved through the tables, subtle, shared, something like agreement. Maya felt every set of eyes, not on her but on Denton, weighing, waiting, calculating. Operators trained to run into fire didn't tolerate cruelty disguised as humor. They had seen too much of the real thing to mistake the difference. Denton swallowed hard. "It won't happen again." Garrison's expression didn't change. "You're right. It won't." He stepped closer, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped just enough for Denton to hear him clearly, while still loud enough that the surrounding tables caught every word. "You're going to apologize. Then you're going to clean up the mess you made. And after that, you're going to walk yourself to the duty office and explain what you just did before I have to." Denton's jaw tightened, humiliation spreading across his face. "Chief, with respect." 3 seconds, Garrison said, not raising his voice, not moving, just delivering a countdown like a man stating the weather. 3. Denton blinked rapidly. "Chief, 2. The room held its breath. A chair creaked somewhere, loud in the silence. Denton's throat bobbed in a hard swallow. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, the words tumbling out. He turned to Maya, eyes darting away from hers, voice barely steady. "Doc Rios, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have touched your tray. I shouldn't have done any of that. I'm sorry." Maya nodded once. Not cruelly, not triumphantly, just acknowledging the apology for what it was. A cornered man choosing the only option he had left. "Now clean it," Garrison said. Denton lowered himself to the floor and began scooping soggy chicken and rice into his hands, placing it back onto the tray in sad, crumpled handfuls. A few seals washed with the blank, unreadable expressions they wore during long, freezing night operations, calm, detached, focused. They weren't enjoying it. They were cataloging it. Maya watched him for a moment, then shifted her eyes to Garrison. He wasn't watching Denton anymore. He was watching her, not to check if she was okay. She could tell he already knew she wasn't shaken, but to gauge something else, something harder to define. Recognition. Assessment. The moment passed quickly. "On your feet," Garrison said when Denton had scraped the last smear of rice. From the floor, Denton rose, hands dirty, face flushed, shame clinging to him like sweat. "Take that tray," Garrison said. Dump it, and then head straight to the duty office. Denton nodded, muttered something like, yes, Chief, and hurried off, tray dripping onto the floor behind him as the doors banged shut. The silence held for another beat before the room exhaled all at once. Voices flickering back on, utensils clattering, boots shifting, conversations resuming in cautious fragments. Life flowed back in, but something remained altered, something subtle but unmistakable. Maya breathed out slowly, tension leaving her shoulders in controlled increments. She bent to grab her tray, but Garrison beat her to it, lifting it effortlessly and placing it on a nearby table. You didn't have to do that, she said, feeling oddly exposed under the steadiness of his gaze. I didn't do it for you, he replied, then added after a pause, not only for you. He's going to hate me, she said quietly. He'll get over it, Garrison replied. Then, softer, and if he doesn't, he won't get the chance to show it. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. One of the younger operators approached and set down a fresh tray of food in front of her. Chicken, rice, vegetables, still steaming. Mess crew said this one's on the house, he muttered, giving a quick nod before returning to his table. Maya stared at the tray. She had expected anger, embarrassment, maybe a headache from the adrenaline. She hadn't expected this muted warmth, this sudden shift in how the room regarded her. Garrison tapped the edge of the tray lightly. Sit. Eat. Nobody eats alone in here today. She sat. He returned to his seat, but kept her in peripheral awareness. That same unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. As Maya picked up her fork, still processing the bewildering weight of what had just happened, she didn't know. Couldn't know. That the mess hall incident was not the beginning of the story, but the middle. That the Foot Locker discovered that morning would soon unravel everything they thought they understood about loyalty, silence, and the scars people carry in locked boxes for decades. Nor could she know that the letter inside, dated 1972, had a name on it that would soon collide with hers in ways she never expected. But she would, very soon. In the days after the mess hall incident, life on base moved with its usual rigid tempo. Training rotations, mandatory briefs, sunrise runs that carved silhouettes against the Pacific. But beneath that disciplined rhythm, something else pulsed quietly, something that seemed to follow Maya from building to building. Operators she barely knew nodded to her in passing. A few younger guys cleared space for her at crowded tables without saying a word. Even the usually stone-faced instructors offered small acknowledgments. Nothing dramatic, just subtle shifts that said we saw what happened, and we decided something about you that day. Maya tried to ignore it, tried to funnel her focus back into her work, back into heart rate models and cortisol graphs and sleep deprivation algorithms. But part of her kept circling back to the morning the old Foot Locker had been dug out of storage. She hadn't thought about it since. But when the call came from command requesting her presence in an administrative office she'd never been invited to before, the connection clicked into her mind before she even opened the door. Inside, Garrison was waiting, sitting in a metal chair beside an older captain whose hair was more gray than black. Between them on the table sat the Foot Locker, cleaned, polished, and unmistakable. Maya felt a prickle of confusion. Sir, she asked. The captain gestured for her to sit. Dr. Rios, during the renovation of Facility C, a number of archived items resurfaced. One of them bears your name. She blinked, certain she'd misheard him. My name. Not exactly yours, he corrected, but close enough that we thought you should see it. He opened the Foot Locker, gently, almost reverently, revealing the same medals, papers, and folded letter that had sparked the whole rumor mill days earlier. But now that she was close enough to see them clearly, something inside her tightened. The handwriting on the letter, the shaky script dated 1972, was a handwriting she recognized. Her grandfather's. He died when she was 6. A man she barely remembered beyond warm hands, soft humming, and a sense of deep, unspoken sadness that clung to him like a shadow. Garrison watched her closely, like he already knew what was about to unravel. He served with us, he said quietly. Not officially, not in the way that gets written into public records. The captain slid the letter toward her. Your grandfather was part of an operation that remained classified for 50 years. This team didn't come home. He was the only survivor. And according to this letter, he never forgave himself. Maya opened it slowly, the creases fragile beneath her fingers. The words were simple, almost painfully so: an apology, a confession of guilt, and a message addressed to the family I failed by surviving instead of them. Her throat tightened. "Why are you showing me this?" The captain exchanged a glance with Garrison. "Because your name was listed as next of kin on a file sealed long before you were born. And because we believe he left this so one day someone would understand why he lived the way he did." Maya closed her eyes, remembering all those afternoons as a child when her grandfather stared out windows, the house silent except for his slow breathing. The way he'd flinch at loud noises. How he avoided Veterans Day ceremonies. How he never spoke about the service everyone assumed he'd never been part of. But he had. He just couldn't bear the weight of it. Garrison leaned forward, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "There's something else you need to know. The unit he served with, they were the predecessors to us." The realization washed over her like a tide. He was a SEAL? Not a name, the captain said, but in every way that mattered. Maya took a long breath, letting the truth settle into her bones. This man she'd known only as a quiet, broken figure had once stood where these operators stood now, had carried burdens heavier than anyone around him ever. Understood, and had locked every piece of that life away for fear of passing its scars onto the next generation. Garrison closed the footlocker gently. "You should take it home. It's yours now." Maya hesitated. "Why tell me after all this time?" The captain answered before Garrison could. "Because sometimes the past surfaces right when the present needs the reminder. And because what happened in that mess hall the other day, you didn't just stand alone. You stood the way people in your family have been standing for decades." She felt something warm, painful, and indescribably grounding settle in her chest. For the first time, the mess hall scene came back to her not as humiliation, not as fear or frustration, but as clarity. "This is who you come from," the moment whispered. When she left the office carrying the footlocker, the metal felt warm despite the cool hallway air, as if the decades sealed inside it were finally breathing again. Outside, Garrison walked beside her for a moment before stopping. "Your grandfather was a good man," he said. "And for what it's worth, I think he'd be proud of you." She didn't trust herself to speak, so she nodded. Slowly, steadily, she made her way across the base, the Pacific wind pulling at her hair as the sun dipped low across the rooftops. Life continued around her, boots thudding, orders shouted, the steady churn of men being shaped into something stronger. But she moved through it differently now, aware of a thread stretching from 1972 to the present, binding her to truths she never knew she carried. And as she stepped into the quiet evening, footlocker in hand, Maya realized something she hadn't before. The silence in the mess hall had never really been about Denton. It had been about lineage, about respect, about the unseen weight a single act can reveal, and about a legacy she had only just discovered, one she would now decide how to carry forward.